The most famous Christian creed says Jesus went to hell for 3 days after he died. Is it true? And what did he do there? I found the answer. The idea that Jesus went to hell comes mostly from one verse, First Peter 3:19. It says, after his death, Jesus preached to the spirits in prison. Without knowing any of the background I'm about to share here, many people assume Jesus went to hell to give people one last chance to be saved, like people who never heard about him before, for instance. But where Jesus went wasn't actually hell at all, and the spirits he preached to were not human. Peter was referencing the end of another popular story. The full verse gives us a clue. 1 Peter 3:19 says, Jesus proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. The idea that the prison Jesus visited was located in hell is a modern assumption, and there's a really easy way to test it for accuracy. So think about it. Logically, Jesus couldn't have visited spirits in hell because according to the Bible, the population of hell is currently 0. Yep, nobody's in hell right now, yet. Think about it this way. The day of judgment mentioned in Revelation hasn't happened yet. Nobody's been thrown into the lake of fire. So if hell's empty right now, then Jesus couldn't have gone there to preach. This is where some of our traditions and the English translation of the Bible has kind of messed us up a little bit. What they did was lump all of these different names and locations in the underworld together and call them all hell. But in the Bible's original language, there are several different locations in the realm of the dead. So where was the prison that Jesus visited? Peter mentions an underworld prison again a little later in 2 Peter 2:4. This verse says God cast angels who sinned into hell. But the original Greek doesn't say hell at all. It says God sent angels to Tartarus, not hell. Tartarus is described as a gloomy place of darkness, not the lake of fire that we associate with hell today. So it seems after Jesus died, he actually went to Tartarus, the gloomy prison, where Peter says angels are imprisoned. Tartarus had another name too, and it's mentioned in a Bible story about an exorcism. It's time for some seriously cool nerd stuff. Jesus came across a guy possessed by a bunch of demons. They called themselves Legion in Luke chapter 8. So Jesus performed an exorcism. He drove the demons out of the man, and what they said next is a huge clue for us. The demons begged Jesus not to send them to one particular place that they were terrified of. They called it the abyss. It's actually the same prison for angels mentioned by Peter. And according to scholars, Tartarus and abyss are the same place. The Greeks called it Tartarus, and the Jews typically called it the abyss, but it's basically the same concept. A dark, gloomy, supernatural prison for divine beings. Legion knows about this prison, and they know it's bad. But how do they know that? It's because that's exactly where God sent Legion's parents, the angels called the Watchers. This is actually a storyline from the book of First Enoch. There's pieces of it in the Bible, but in First Enoch, God had imprisoned some angels called the Watchers because they had corrupted humans and taught them dangerous knowledge before the flood, and even worse yet, seduced some human women, creating the giants called Nephilim. As weird as that sounds, we see that in the Bible in Genesis 6, 1-4. So all of this stuff can be found in the Bible, but this next piece is going to be found exclusively in First Enoch, and it's going to help explain why Jesus went to the prison. In First Enoch chapter 14, the Watchers begged Enoch for an appeal. They asked Enoch to go to God and tell him that they were sorry. They want to ask forgiveness, to which God says, no. According to Enoch, these guys almost caused the human race to wipe itself out before the flood. Like, you and I wouldn't even be here if God hadn't intervened. One, if he hadn't sent the flood, and two, if he hadn't imprisoned the Watchers in Tartarus. That might seem like God is cruel, locking them up and not letting them out, but think about it. We wouldn't be here if God hadn't done that. So no way is God going to let them out and risk a repeat incident. Peter says God locked them up until the final judgment. But their kids were still running around upstairs. Demons. They're loose on the earth. That's where Peter picks up the story from Enoch and writes the ending. When Peter said that Jesus spoke to the spirits in prison, the word translated as preach can actually mean to proclaim or publicly announce a truth. That word preach can kind of throw us off in English, but notice Peter doesn't say Jesus preached the gospel to them or shared the good news. So we shouldn't necessarily imagine that Jesus is giving a sermon to the angels here. In fact, it was probably just the opposite. If you had the Enoch story in your head, then he's announcing, hey, you guys are toast. I just beat you. Jesus basically says to them, it's over, guys. You failed to stop God's plans from happening. And your kids, the demons up there, they failed too. I've already been to the cross. I'm going to go back up there now, and I'm going to come out of my tomb. This is exactly why Peter said Jesus visited spirits in prison, and here's the clue, from the days of Noah. Because that's exactly when these spirits committed their crimes and were sent to the prison. I don't know about you, but I find this explanation to be a lot more thorough and satisfying than what I originally thought the first time I read this as a young adult. 15 years ago, before I had any biblical training, I was one of the ones who thought, hey, Jesus must be going to preach to people from Noah's day to give them a chance to be saved. Wow, God's really fair. Well, I still think God's really fair, but now that I'm older, I see a hole in that explanation. Why would Jesus go offer salvation to people who lived before the flood, but not the people who lived after the flood? So I'm not sure that works. It makes more sense now to me that Jesus was going to visit angels who had committed a crime at that time, right before the flood. In that case, Jesus goes to the prison to say, hey, I just thwarted your whole rebellion. It's officially over. I'm closing the book on it. I would love to hear your experience when you first heard this explanation in the comments. So let me know what you thought and how that just changed your world, if at all, or if you thought it was just crazy. We solve biblical mysteries through research on this channel, so embrace your inner nerd. Welcome to the community. We have a whole video series on the angels who ended up in Tartarus. Starting with the moment 200 angels gathered on a mountain to make the pact to destroy humanity before the flood. To find out what Enoch and Genesis say about that, watch this video next.